Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Your Mortgage Process. I'm, of course, your host, Greg Wareham. We have a fantastic guest for you today, Mr. Patrick Lynam. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Patrick, you work for Colliers Engineering or International?
Colliers Engineering and Design.
Okay. And you are an engineering firm, and it's a big company. I mean, I've heard of it.
Yes, sir. So, we're roughly about 2,500 people at this point.
Okay.
And we're a very diversified company in very different engineering fields. Before coming to Colliers, we were Mazer Consulting, a local New Jersey firm.
Sure,
here.
based in Red Bank.
Yes, sir. Yep. Acquired by Colliers International, who's the parent company, and they were looking for an engineering arm of their portfolio of companies. And they came to us, and we had the same culture, so we thought it was a good fit, and now we're off to the races.
Now, so the people got to listen up to this show today because we're going to kind of go deep on the civil engineering and real estate, development, commercial, residential. And I think it's something that, the common person, even people in the industry, mortgage people, real estate agents, you don't really think about the due diligence that goes on before a project even starts, right? Because we all see the end unit, and that's what we're marketing and that's what we're selling to. Now, for you head up the project for some of these bigger developers, correct?
Correct. Yes. I'm part of the site civil department in Colliers Engineering Design, and department manager. We have about 30 people in our department in New Jersey. We're part of a larger, about 110 across the whole company. But the site civil portion of engineering, we really start at the beginning with the property owners and the brokers. And when they come in with a property, some people don't know what they want to do. Some people already know what they want to do. So when they come to us, we'll look at the site and do a high level due diligence on our end, sure, just to tell them what they can and can't do, especially in New Jersey.
Right.
And so we'll take it from there. And once we go through that, and once it passes the high due diligence portion,
sure,
then we go into the procurement or the hard due diligence, I want to say.
You know what? I want to go through an example because what you do is so technical and so critical to being able to put these projects together. So let's just say for a second, I'm a builder and I've identified this piece of land and I look at it and say, hey, I want to put 10 units on that piece of land. My first step really needs to be to contact you and your company to figure out what I can and can't do, correct?
Correct.
And now that I've reached out to you, I found this great piece of land. What's the process from there? I've turned it over to you, Patrick. What do we got to find out?
Well, like I mentioned, we'll look at the high level due diligence, which includes the zoning of the property. We'll look at available mapping that we have on that property, as far as whether it's wetlands, you have a stream going through, which may have a floodplain associated with it. And also, we look into what road it's on. Sometimes
right,
that has an effect on the process and what you can and can't do, whether it's a DOT road, county road, or municipal road. And then also we'll do a little environmental due diligence as far as seeing what the surrounding properties are, see if there's any potential or what's on a property itself.
How do you even get this information? So I just come in, I like the piece of land and I can picture 10 houses on it. How do you even start that? Is it a survey that's done to the property first? You pull things from public record?
Actually, before we even get to the survey, this is like the high level due diligence. We'll go, there's available mapping. You can do OPRA requests to the municipalities. And
I know her.
Yeah. So that process is pretty straightforward. Anybody can file an OPRA, it's Open Public Records Act form, and submit it to the municipality, and they'll go through their records on the property, see what they have, and we'll obtain whatever mapping they have. We'll review it based on our experience with other properties and current regulations. We'll identify any potential constraints that are on our property through there. We also have a lot of online mapping that are keeps growing. So sometimes I'm exposed to new avenues of getting information like every day. So you just got to
Yeah,
know.
you're like an inside intel person. Seriously, to get this information and from the town level and everything like that, you really got to have the expertise to be able to identify what you need and how to move it in the right direction.
Exactly, and then once we have all that information, we can review it against the current regulations and see what kind of challenges we might have with the property. Sometimes even a simple tax map. You obtain a tax map, and that will show up like encumbrances on a property, like easements and
Sure.
And other conservation or floodplains, even on the tax map itself. So we try to do a shotgun approach, grab everything we can. We don't have much time.
Sure.
So we
I mean, what's the window on something like that to just get a first level review of everything?
Well, as soon as you get a property, you get an address, and then I do all my due diligence in like a couple of days just to get it out. But the OPRA process takes a while.
Okay.
So you want to get ahead of that. We have access to weather mapping immediately, so we'll go into and look and search through the property in that way, and try to identify anything that may be a concern or constraint on a property.
So if I'm the person looking to acquire, if I'm the builder looking to acquire that property, I need to get through that first level with tax mapping and environmental and all those things that you had mentioned. They also need to get that OPRA report back, correct?
Correct.
And when I get that information back, is that the time where I can say, okay, well, this project looks like something we may be able to move forward on? Okay.
Yeah. Once you get past that part, then we can take it to the next step, which is maybe a PSA on a property.
What's a PSA?
A property purchase agreement.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know that one.
So once we pass that high level, then you get a level of comfort on whether or not they want to actually put an LOI together and
letter of intent for everybody.
Letter of intent, yeah, and then start negotiating a deal. What they during this process too, I can do like really rough concept sketches on what's permitted on a property, so I can get roughly square footages of building sizes, so they can helps the developer or builder develop a pro forma on a property, so they can negotiate. For the price of the property.
Makes sense. So you're going to do all that diligence from the town standpoint to understand what the setbacks are, like what kind of structure can actually go there square footage wise and distance to the road and all that complicated stuff that goes into it.
Yeah. And you can do that real quick up front. I mean, you do it 2-dimensionally, which means it's just, just looking at the high level.
Sure.
Try to look at 3-dimensionally as far as the topography, if there's a stream or nearby or wetlands, you can just do that real quick through Google Earth and from the available FEMA mapping.
Right.
So you can do a lot up front before we even get to the hard due diligence part.
So then I went into a purchase and sale contract to purchase the property. Now, you had mentioned before about depending on what road it's on. I mean, you got to put in utilities, infrastructure. If it's a big project, there may be traffic concerns. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, when you go into the traffic part, definitely if you're on a DOT road, it's going to be they have their own regulations that you have to follow. Then depending on what the use is, you can get an idea which generates more traffic than another type of project. Mm-hmm. So right off the bat, whether or not you're going to be triggering like a high level DOT review or county review, or something that may even trigger a new signal at your access point, depending on the size of the development.
And who makes that decision? Is it between the town and the engineering firm to say, hey, we need a traffic light to accommodate what we're looking at from a traffic pattern?
Yeah, there's warrant analysis.
Okay.
They call it warrant analysis. So the traffic engineer involved with the project would go through this process of almost like a checklist of whether or not you meet all the criteria that's required to have a signal, and it's largely had to do with how many trips the project will bring to the site.
It's funny. I remember when they were rebuilding that. We work in the same building. So Patrick and I work at Bellworks building in Homedale, New Jersey. And I remember when they were bringing this building back from the dead, I live in the town, and the town was, the traffic, and how are we going to accommodate the traffic pattern? So I would imagine massive studies went into that. And I mean, the end result is there's no more traffic than there ever was. But, you have to, before you can get approval for anything, you have to make sure all that type of thing's done, correct?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, when we get past the LOI and the PSA, and when that's signed and ready to go, then you're into your hard due diligence phase of the contract. Whether it's 60 or 90 days. And during that time, then you go start doing additional investigations. The minimum, I think, is a survey of the property and environmental. Phase 1, which is it. But if you're doing like a daycare, you need a phase 1 preliminary assessment, because there's separate rules that has to go into with regards to daycares if you want to do a daycare on a property. So at a minimum, survey, environmental. If you really want to get into additional, maybe do geotech, hit a couple borings, but and then once you pass those 3, say you get clean on those, then we go into the procurement phase.
Okay.
But sometimes if you do identify other things, you have in your contract that if you find something during that due diligence, you get extended.
Get out, right.
Say like environmental, say there's a dry cleaner on site. Mm-hmm. That's a red flag. Gas stations are red flags. Then you'll go through the phase 1, and it hasn't been cleaned up, or if there's potential for environmental contamination, then you go into maybe a phase 2, which is whatever you identified. They call them area concerns in the phase 1. Then you go and do a little more deeper dive into the property, and then investigate further. And if that turns out clean, then
there's so much to unpack in that, right? So you're just looking at the term environmental. To your point, if there's been a dry cleaner or a gas station on the property or any time in the past, I would think that environmental is probably one of the more difficult hurdles to get over.
Yeah, I mean, it's in every contract. So everyone's very sensitive to the whole environmental, especially in New Jersey, because we have a history with environmental contaminated sites throughout the years. But I mean, once that's done, I mean, like you said, I'm trying to think of some other uses that might trigger even a simple, like an old house that may have an underground oil tank, right? I mean, that's common for residential.
Sure.
So those are the things that, taking out the tank would be the phase 2 part.
Okay. And then, so we have the environmental, and then we have you may do a geotech. Is that the term that you use?
Yeah. Geotech is just, you go out there and you drill borings, and basically you're looking underneath the ground to see if the soil is okay to build on, or what kind of challenges you may have, building foundations, or high groundwater.
How deep do you go on the borings?
Depends on what we're looking for.
Okay.
But it can be anywhere from 30 to 100 feet.
Okay.
Going down below.
So now you're digging to check out the soil, the foundation, so you can build foundations, everything like that. The first thing that popped into my mind with it, Patrick, is everything fixable? Right? Or is it, you ever look at it and you can't do anything about this, the groundwater is too high?
Yeah, well, there's ways, being an engineer, you find ways around to accommodate those challenges. But there's some regulatory challenges that you just can't overcome, because it's just law. You can't do what you want to do, and they have a framework on what you can and can't do. But working on contaminated sites, a long time. So there's different measures that you put in to call it engineering controls. Okay. And sometimes, depending on what the contamination is, sometimes you hit arsenic. Say you're on a farm, and you're doing for fertilizer, what they use in historical pesticides.
Such a good point. Yeah.
So then you that's usually a high arsenic content, but sometimes arsenic is naturally occurring, and since it's not soluble, then you could just cap it, or put it in a different part of the site where it's not going to be open to the public. So there's engineering controls that can do with a lot of these, whatever you find during environmental.
Man, you're really smart.
No, it's just a lot of experience.
Yeah. It's really there's so many different facets of it and what you can and can't do, and just things like you figure people have been living on this land for thousands of years, right? And
Yeah,
who knows what has been done to the land prior to any record of it.
right.
Like to your point about the farming, I think it's a great point. This used to all be farmland in New Jersey, and they've only had real controls on pesticides and fertilizers for a relatively short period of time, a couple of decades, few decades. So, understanding that and more importantly, how to fix it, I mean, it's critical.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's where we get into we have in New Jersey we have a licensed site remediation professional, LSRP,
Right.
and the DEP kind of registers those people,
Okay.
and they'll go out and do all the investigations, and they'll give advice to developer on what they can and can't do, or what we got to do during construction, additional costs that may incur. There's still a solution, but still a cost to the project.
That's a really great point. So a lot of the stuff, most of the stuff's going to be solutionable. It's at what cost is it remediated?
Exactly.
I've noticed in parts of New Jersey as well, there's a lot of old landfill. I think we were chatting about this a month ago when we were talking on the phone. There's a development in our area that was built on a landfill, and they have vent pipes from the landfill, and sometimes it was difficult to lend on that for a period of time.
Right.
So is that all? That's all public record and things that you have to find out before you're building.
Yeah, that's part of the investigation you do.
Okay.
That's usually they're all registered by the DEP anyway, so you can find those. But sometimes sometimes you can't find it. Sometimes you hit it when you're doing the geotech. That's why you do it out up front, because you're doing those borings and then you hit. It's like you find old like farm dumps. People, that's what they used to do, just dump their garbage and bury it, and there's no record of it unless you're out there doing the borings and you hit it.
Right.
But for the most part, the large landfills are registered, and you can easily find out where those types are.
Now, what do you see? Do you see a lot of issues with flood in New Jersey?
Oh yeah. I mean, especially we all experience it. Whether it's the storm surge or you get the high intensity storms coming through. So there's a lot of regulation actually coming up by the DEP in order to address flooding in New Jersey, and that's part of this. There's multiple acts through the DEP that address flooding.
Okay. And some new ones that are coming down the pike?
Yeah, amendments to old regulations. So we got to stay on top of those.
Sure.
Again, that it's meant to protect residents, but also the balance between the costs associated with complying with those new regulations.
Sure.
So we got to be on top of not only how to comply with the regulations, but what kind of economic impact they have on a project as well.
Sure. Now, when you look at things like flood, I know we have the ocean, so we have the storm issues. Do you see a lot of flooding that can be triggered just from high water table?
There's high water tables, yeah, but the flooding itself, I mean, it's just intuitive that if you have a high groundwater, water's not going to go very far before it hits that groundwater, and then it's not going to go anywhere. So it's going to stay above. So wetlands. If you're next to wetlands, that's a dead giveaway that you're near your high groundwater, right? Because there's wetlands wouldn't grow unless there's high groundwater there. So we have to consider the groundwater as part of our flood analysis and our stormwater management analysis when we're designing the project and going through the procurement process.
Yeah, makes sense. Hey, have you ever ran into a situation where there's some sort of ancient burial ground on a project?
Yeah, so when we find those, there's a process. Anytime you need a wetlands permit or a DP permit, you have to go through a cultural resources analysis where, you got to look at the site and see, we get an archaeologist involved and historian. They get together and, do a report on that particular project to determine whether or not it's almost like a phase one for environmental. You do a phase one archaeological report, just determine whether or not there is a chance that there be burial ground, or even a lot of times it happens next to rivers because naturally, Native Americans will camp near rivers because you got access to water, and a lot of animals, for either foraging or for hunting, they would congregate around rivers. So anytime you go, naturally wetlands are next to rivers.
Right.
So anytime you need to go in for a wetlands permit or another DEP permit, you have to do that process because they identified that, anywhere near rivers is going to have a high chance of having possible, Indian heads or, arrowheads and stuff. So that is part of the process.
That's fascinating. And is there record of that generally, or is that just something that's figured out on site?
Again, you go through the phase one, and anytime it's just part of the permitting process. So, you go through the phase one and archaeological investigation, and that's going to tell you whether or not you need to go to the next step and actually go out and do digging around. So, there are. You have to register the sites.
Sure.
So as they pop up, they become registered.
Right.
But to say you're on a site that hasn't, a vacant site that no one looked at,
right,
you still got to go through this process.
Huh. Something else. Hey, something just popped into my mind because I know in Colts Neck, New Jersey, when I first moved down to this area I used to live in Sussex County, New Jersey. I was in Sparta, New Jersey. We moved down here, and there's a little stream lake at a park around the corner where you can literally filter in this river for old shark teeth from 100 million years ago.
Wow.
And it just, what popped into my mind is this whole thing used to be underwater to begin with.
Yeah.
Right? And it's shifting climates and, shifting topography over the course of time. Who knows what you're going to find when you start digging. You might find a dinosaur down there.
Oh, well, I think, didn't I find the first dinosaur in New Jersey?
I think they did.
Dinosaur bones. So, to your point, this everything was underwater. You can tell that by the geology of New Jersey. Geology of New Jersey is pretty unique, where it has three different major geological formations. You got the lowland sand areas down at the south. Yeah. And then at the north, you got the rock, the mountains. And in between, you got that transition, shale and clay and stuff. So New Jersey is actually very unique geology wise. And we have to use that as we're designing our stormwater management or building when in that design.
Wasn't a portion in New Jersey at some time, didn't the glaciers end like right around New Jersey? I thought I read that somewhere, that the glaciers ended like the Raritan Bridge right in that area. Because you know how the soil changes immediately after you go over the bridges coming down here?
Yeah.
My understanding was there were glaciers, and then they ended and everything started drying out once you got closer to the New Jersey shore.
Well, I don't know that much about it, but
I might not either. I might be making it up. So when we look at bigger projects, because I know you work with a lot of these really big developers, how much due diligence wrong? I know we've been talking about that. How much time goes into the time that one of these big companies come in to identify a piece of land till they actually start building on it?
Well, it depends on what jurisdiction you're in and what kind of permits you need. It's very subjective, but in New Jersey, because we have all, very highly regulated in this state, that it could be, what takes the longest is our outside agency approval. So, okay. Let me just start with the municipal level, because that's, pretty much every project needs that right off the bat. In the municipal level, you go in and what they call site plan approval. And whether or not you're doing a subdivision, maybe you need subdivision approval. But you go through the municipal planning and zoning process. And just that alone, when you put all your documents, they have a checklist, what you got to do. So every town's different. So you go through the checklist, determine what they need, and then you can make a judgment call on what the project actually is, how intense it is, and whether or not you want to ask for any submission waivers to that checklist. Because everything in that checklist costs time, right, and money for that matter. But you can use a judgment call on whether or not, this project, this checklist item doesn't really apply to this. So that's why they have this submission waiver process through the planning and zoning approval.
Now, is it usually just a generic thing that they give you with the checklist is the same?
I wish.
Always?
No.
Okay.
No, like I said, we're home rule here. So, every municipality,
It's different.
It is different.
That makes it easy.
Yeah. But, the state started with the municipal land use law. It started with that. That's the law that the state and then all the municipalities have to at least abide by that law, but they're open to create other ordinances in their local municipalities, depending on, what the local constituents, want to see out there, or what the residents are want to see or protect in their towns. So every checklist is different. Sometimes we can get submission waivers depending on how intense our project is, and then you identify any kind of variances, from the zoning ordinance. Which obviously you try to design a site, without any variances. Meet the setback, the building floor area ratio, stuff along those lines.
Sure.
The zoning, how much parking you have. But ordinances are they're pretty general.
Okay.
So you could come in with a use that says, this your ordinance says I need this much parking for this building, but I got my tenant is not going to need that much parking. So
right.
So you make a case in front of you ask for a variance, you go in front of the board and you present your case saying, this happens a lot with self-storage. Self-storage. Some ordinances don't even recognize self-storage.
Yeah.
Okay. And you go in and sometimes they categorize it as a warehouse, so they require 50 parking stalls, but self-storage only needs like 5.
Right.
So you
to one person that works there,
exactly,
and everybody else.
Yeah. So we go in and that's pretty common variance that we ask for.
Okay.
So you get the submission waivers up front, and then the variances, and then they have these design waivers. These are like, oh, we want to build it this way, but if you know a better way, then you ask for the waiver and we're grant the waiver. So there's different. Those are the 3: submission waivers, variances, and design waivers.
Okay.
You got to identify. Then you make an application to the planning board, and I got to take a step back. If you're not a permitted use, there's a whole separate zoning board you have to go in front of.
Okay.
So if you're not a permitted use, or you exceed the floor area ratio or the building height by 10%, that kicks you into a use variance. So that's a totally different board. So I'm just talking about the planning board process.
Sure.
It's similar with the zoning board, except the only difference is the zoning board is the only authority that can grant use variances.
Okay.
So sometimes that's one part of due diligence. Are you permitted use or not? Or
right.
do you exceed these other thresholds? So you identify that up front. Which board you're going through, whether in front of the zoning board or planning board.
Mm-hmm.
And then you make the application. In that process, the municipality has 45 days to deem you complete, which means they'll go through the checklist.
Okay.
And determine whether or not you comply with all the checklist
That's
items.
not bad then. So 45-day time frame on average to do it. Now
let me take a step back.
Okay.
That's just completeness.
Ah.
So they have 45 days to deem it complete,
mm-hmm.
and then you got to get scheduled for an actual hearing, whether it's zoning board or planning board. So the 45 days is just the beginning.
Okay.
Then that takes another maybe 2 weeks to 30 days to get scheduled for a hearing, depending on the board's agenda at that time. Mm. Then you go to your hearing. Hopefully, it's a one-night hearing, and then after that, then the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks, or it could be a whole 30 days, they introduce and adopt a resolution of the approval. Mm. And then once they adopt the resolution of approval, now there's a 45-day appeal period.
Got it.
So now anybody can appeal that decision by the board.
So I can show up and be like, yeah, I don't like it. I live here and I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
that can happen.
Okay.
And sometimes the board will look at it and determine whether or not the validity of it. But right. So there is another risk, 45-day risk after you get your memorialized resolution. But we can be doing things, outside agency approvals, addressing whatever conditions of the resolution that we had agreed to during the board process. So all that process, and then we got to comply and get the sign off from the planning board's consultants.
Sure.
They have their own engineers, they have their own planners, landscape architects, traffic engineers.
Sure.
And so, we'll address everything, all the comments or the conditions that the board and their professionals have, and what we call resolution compliance.
Okay.
So it's a term probably in New Jersey only, but you get the resolution and they have all these conditions, and usually we can address those within the 45-day appeal period. Mm-hmm. So that's what we target.
It's really political. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah.
Time and presentation, right?
Yeah. I mean, it can be depending on the project and depending on, the agendas and the timing and all that. It could be anywhere between I would say roughly around 7 to 9 months.
Okay.
Just to get to the municipal process.
Got it. Now, are there sometimes where you look at a town on a new request, someone you're working with, you're like, and other ones you're like, they're easy to work with.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, like you said, it's political. Some towns don't want these uses. Some towns want these uses. And it's, just based on our experience and, and our, projects that we have ongoing in the office,
sure,
we can determine, where those towns are and advise the developer on, that's another level of challenge that we'll offer.
It's another level of experience, of value for what you bring to the table too. Right out of the gate, you'd be like, well, this town, these are the problems you're going to run into right out of the gate.
Yeah, exactly. So that comes from experience.
And now every project that you do is unique, right? So if you go in with one big project and you get it approved, you get everything approved, and then you came in with an identical project in the same town, it's not like you set precedent with the first case. Everything's got to go through that exact same process again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said precedent, because we are all in it's a legal proceeding.
Sure.
And in a town, if there's an interpretation of a certain ordinance and the board acts on it, now that sets precedent. So it
can make it easier.
Yeah, it could be predictable. It makes it not necessarily easier, but predictable at least. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Now, question for you in today's real estate market. So we know that in our country, we have like a 4 or 5 million unit housing shortage. In New Jersey, there's obviously a huge housing shortage, probably bigger than other parts of the country based on limited land and high population, high demand. Are you finding the towns easier to work with on construction projects because we have such a lack of inventory?
Well, let me take a step back, because there's a whole other aspect of housing in New Jersey, and it's the affordable housing portion. So I think it was the Mount Laurel decision from that would, a judge said, listen, we need to create affordable housing in New Jersey. So they created these obligations of each municipality to have affordable housing.
Is it 10%? Or is it
I think
the same
it depends on
the
type of use. Yeah, but it could be any 10, 15% of the units that you put in have to be affordable. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, it's been kicking around in the courts, this Mount Laurel decision, and I think the latest is that now municipalities have to have affordable housing in their own town. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of putting pressure on a municipality. They have an obligation to provide this affordable housing in their municipality. So the easiest way to do that is through the developers and building more housing for the town and getting a percentage of that as affordable housing. So in that regards, there's a kind of an incentive for towns to approve the residential. It never used to be easy, because it adds it's a stigma to residential, because it brings in school children, which has a direct impact to school taxes and higher taxes. So there's always a sensitivity to residential, but I think with all the incentives by the state or the court system to get affordable housing, I think it's becoming easier, especially now overshadowed by now we have a lot of pushback on warehousing now.
Okay.
So the school children taking a step back. Not many people having children anyway.
Right.
So that's not really a concern. Well, it's still a concern in some towns, but it's not as high as concerns now with all the warehousing coming in.
That's a great point with affordable housing, because before the Mount Laurel decision, if you were putting in housing in a particular area and just say 10%, you had to, like 10% had to be invested in affordable housing, you didn't even have to necessarily put it in your town, right? You just build it somewhere else.
Oh yeah, some towns. That's why some towns, don't have an obligation at all. They have a surplus.
Okay.
Because they were other
sense.
towns were paying the other town to take their obligation of affordable housing.
Right. That's a great point. So we're going to take a quick break, Patrick. So Greg Wareham, Patrick, we're going to be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Greg Wareham with Your Mortgage Process. We, of course, have Patrick Lynam from Colliers Engineering today. So, Patrick, I just wanted to talk about housing for 1 second, then go back to some of the things we were talking about. So I think it's really critical for people listening that when you have a developer in looking to build units in today's environment with such a housing shortage, these projects are a good thing for the community, right?
I agree. Yeah. But anytime you bring housing to people, I mean, you're helping at the core shelter. I mean, you're giving shelter to people. I mean, that's the core of it.
Of everything, right? You got to have a place to live.
You got a place to live, place to eat.
Yep.
Place to play.
Right.
Recreate,
Yeah, so I think it's really critical that a lot of these projects are kind of moving in the right direction, not to mention the fact there's an affordable housing component with it. So you're supplying housing to a diverse group of people. And it's a fundamental part of our society. So build these units, right? Let's give people a place to live.
No, absolutely. I mean, if this is zoned for it and, there's demand for it, then, you're filling that demand. You're accommodating the people.
Plus, it stabilizes pricing. You look at our area of supply and demand, and the demand's high and there's no supply. It just forces prices up. If you stabilize the supply and demand, you stabilize the price of everything. So anyway, I digress. I apologize. So I know that you also represent towns as well. You're not just developers. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have a whole municipal department, and they actually are hired by the municipalities, and there's a variety of different services they provide to the municipalities. A couple of them are what they represent. They're the board engineers, whether zoning board or planning board or just the town engineer. So there's some municipalities that retain us to review other engineering plans, and then if you're like a special projects engineer in the town, then you're doing what the council wants. If the council wants to add a park here, or they want to add a parking lot somewhere else, or redevelop, for maybe a pool or spray park, a water park, then we'll design that as through our municipal department for the town and put it out to bid and construct it for the residents.
Right. Oh, that's great. I want to come back a little bit to the overall process because I interrupted where you were going before. So now we have approval from the town, kind of that 7 to 9 month process, let's call it. What other approvals or due diligence also happens?
Depending on where the site is, like you said, you identify all these different reviewing agencies that you have involved in your project up front. You go through that's vetted out through the due diligence process. But once you get into the procurement phase, like I mentioned, I described the municipal zoning process. Then there's other, depending on like if you're on a DOT road or county road, then you'll need to get their approval as well. So there's DOT is right off the bat a big one. If you're on a DOT road, you have to go through. There's different levels of permits and processes. There's got a minor access permit, a major access permit, and a major with planning. Obviously, major planning is more intense because it's going to trigger like improving off-site maybe signals or widening lanes and so forth to accommodate development. County level is just the county planning board you go through, and they'll review against the County Planning Act, and they'll look at the drainage, whether or not you're affecting any of their culverts downstream, or whether or not their road can handle your traffic, similar to the DOT in that respect. But they'll review that process as
So
well.
when certain changes need made for lights or road enhancement, is that picked up by the developer or the town, or could it be a combination of both?
It could be a combination of both, but primarily it's the developer.
Okay.
Because their development is triggering the need for this offsite improvements to happen. So most of the time it's the developer that fits the bill for the public improvements.
And there could be a lot that goes into that. I mean, you have in our area, there's a Bass Pro Shop they've been putting in for forever, and they like literally built an off ramp off the highway for this place.
Yeah, that's actually we're working on that project.
Wow, it's a big project.
It's a very large project, and anybody from New Jersey coming over that bridge can see it right off the bat. And they've been moving this mound of dirt around the site on purpose. Mm-hmm. And it's because the soil over there is not very good, so they're using this large weight of this dirt to compress the soil and compact the soil so it's able to be built on. So so it's a huge geotechnical project, environmental as well.
Wow. So I was thinking also before we were talking earlier about wildlife. Because that's a concern.
Yeah.
So you just can't come in or trees. You can't come in and cut down all the trees and kill all the wildlife. There's plans and could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, part of the due diligence process, you'll do a quick search on threatened and endangered species. And then that's an interesting subject by itself. There's some threatened and endangered species in New Jersey that are not really threatened and endangered elsewhere in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it's only particular to the state. So there's some federally protected species, and then there's state protected species that you got to look into. And you got to they have a lot of good resources on the internet through the DEP website that can maybe give you some guidance on what potential habitats mm-hmm. for these different species are. Largely, like I mentioned before, they're near wetland areas because naturally, like, people would congregate around rivers.
Sure.
So does the animals, and they forage there as well. So those are a lot of areas that we focus on with regards to the threatened and endangered species. So that, and then you mentioned the trees. There's the trees are governed locally most of the time by local ordinances. Mm-hmm. So you can take down the trees, but if you can't replace the quantity on your site, sometimes the municipal ordinance will require a contribution to a tree fund or something right. that the town has, where mm-hmm. they'll use that to put trees elsewhere in the town.
See, I think that's a great part of the process, because I'm one of those people that hate seeing trees get cut down because they're natural air filters. Like, oh, don't cut down the trees. Like when I got neighbors that start cutting down the trees, like, what are you cutting down the trees for? Because, to me, they're aesthetically pleasing. They're natural air filters. So I think it's a good process. You can cut down trees. At least there's checks and balances in place to make sure that we're trying to put them back into circulation, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, and part of the site plan approval process includes a landscape plan. So
right.
You are planting as much as you can back on when the project is complete.
Right. Makes sense. So what else? What other phases of the project are we missing? What are some of the other due diligence that gets done before they start actually putting a shovel in the ground?
Well, once you get all these outside agency approvals and you get your planning board approval, and you satisfied the resolution, I call it doing resolution compliance. It's a couple, you got to post your performance guarantees and pay any inspection fees. Well, once you get all that done, the site plans actually get signed off by the town, mm-hmm. Whether it's the secretary, the chairman, and the engineer. They sign off on the plans. Once the plans are, that means everything is done through planning and zoning. And now you can actually get into building. So now, you take those plans and you submit to the building department along with, architectural construction documents, which mm-hmm. During the approval process, you only need a floor plan, like preliminary floor plans and elevations, just to give the board what the building's going to look like. But the real heavy lifting of the approval of the building plans come through the building department.
Okay. And now once construction starts, are you out of the project, or are you in it until the last building's done?
Yeah, I mean, it's still, as much planning as we do up front, there's things that come up right. During construction. And this is just a natural process that we stay involved with. The general contractor would submit us like specs that they want us to review. Maybe they want to substitute something for something else, and we'll review it, make sure it's okay to have that replacement. And then construction meetings, there's during construction, there's a lot going on. I mean, you have traffic control sometimes, so you got the police involved. So they're there. You got fire safety, life safety going on. It's very construction is a very intense process.
Right.
So you got to be there primarily for safety. We go out and inspect as they're building. The underground utilities. Make sure they're compacted correctly. Make sure that the pad for the building is compacted to the right percentage, so there's no settlement. So we're still involved during the construction process.
Yeah, wow. There's a lot, and this is kind of you're talking about. I'm thinking to myself, this is one of the great things about America, is the checks and balances associated with getting a project like this done. You're going out, you're re-inspecting the work, you're making sure that everything's compliant and stable. But we have so much due diligence goes in from what you're doing in the checks and balances until the property comes to fruition at the end. It's great.
Yeah. It seems like it's a lot, but
yeah, it is. It's start to finish to get it in there. Is there anything we're missing about the process at all?
Well, once construction is complete, then you file to release your performance guarantees, your bonds.
Okay.
And that gets satisfied, and then you file for your C of O, and you have your grand opening, and now
we're ready to roll.
Yeah.
And you call the mortgage person.
Yeah.
And you finance it on the property. I'm gonna put a shameless plug out there really quickly because a lot of people don't know what my company does, but we do provide financing in some situations up to $50 million for people looking to build and develop projects. So if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me directly at greg@yourmortgageprocess.com. Can we do a quick recap of the process?
Sure.
Then I'm going to plug your company.
All right. So, initially we'll find, sometimes we'll help find a site, go through the high level due diligence, do some deeper dive in the hard due diligence. Then we get into the procurement phase, get all your approvals, and then you're into construction. You see you through construction, and then you go for C of O. I mean, sometimes we stay on for operations after the fact.
Makes sense. That's awesome, Patrick. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And if someone in everything that you're saying, you're so well versed in your area. And I'm thinking working for a big company when it comes to something as important as construction is probably important based on the resources that you have in your fingertips as the consumer or the builder.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's just, with our company, we're very diversified, so we can offer, depending on what the project needs, we can offer different service lines out of our engineering. Whether sometimes projects don't need all the full line of services we provide, but we have them at our disposal if the project needs it.
And because projects are so fickle and unique unto themselves, if you do run into a situation, you have to have a company that, man, we're going to be able to point it in this direction for you, that direction. You're going to work with this department and so on, or you're going to get stuck in the minutia of a project taking a very long time to get done.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. What's the best way for someone that's interested in putting together a development to reach out to your company?
Well, we're at Bell Works, so you can just come to Bell Works. We're on the 4th floor, and we're Colliers Engineering Design. You can reach me via email or the website itself, collierseng.com, or via email. It's Patrick, Patrick, Lynam, Lynam, and that's at collierseng.com, all one word. Or you can reach us in phone number 732-383-1950. And I'll throw out my cell phone. This is 908-489-0780.
All right, guys. You just got the cell phone number of a guy that knows everything about building new construction. You can really help people. Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you for all your time today.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for being on the show, and thank you, everyone, for listening out there today. We appreciate you. This is Greg Wareham with Your Mortgage Process. We had Patrick Lynam from Colliers Engineering today. Thanks, everybody. Catch up with you next week. Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Your Mortgage Process, hosted by Greg Wareham, produced by Greg Wareham and Nick Pavis at The Social Rift, and executively produced by The Social Rift. Thank you again for tuning in, and we look forward to catching up with you next week.